is Matt Watson. I am from California, Precious Metals Commodity Management. I've come with a message I wanted to share with you guys today. Mining investment, clearly we need it. It's just so desperately needed. You can see on the slide here, by the way, my slide decks are very content intense. I tend to fire hose people, leave them wanting a copy of the presentation to read through it later. But all the different metals highlighted on the periodical table are part of my consulting business that I'm basically chasing for different clients. I started off very much as a precious metals guy, big fish consumer with Seagate Technologies, buying lots of platinum and ruthenium, $500 million worth of metal. Now I've then transitioned into being a big fish supplier. I know the precious metals world inside and out. And now I've expanded. I'm getting into battery metals and going, kind of got this integration going here horizontally across the periodical table, which I'm now touching rare earths and everything under the sun. So let's get through this because there's a mineral super cycle that's afoot, clearly. In the backup of my slide deck, I've got some slides that give you some background on me, some of my clients who I deal with. I deal with everybody from Toyota to some of the battery makers to a number of recyclers in the industry. I offer a number of subscription reports geared mostly toward the precious metals. I've been speaking on these topics for about 3.5 years. I got to admit, when I first started preaching this message, I was a lone idiot out there on the end of the, end of the precipice, telling the world, "Oh, we're driving off a cliff. We're driving off a cliff." And I was the only cat out there doing that. And so I'm thrilled to hear more and more analysts preaching that message. Benchmark Minerals is giving the lunchtime keynote. My thinking has very much gotten in line with where they're at as well. So I think they're one of the premier analyst firms out there in the battery metal sets. And really, it's all driven through all these different clean energy technology transitions that are going on. These are the primary macro trends that are driving this, everything from nuclear to hydrogen economy to heat exchangers, all the EVs, of course. And we're going to go electrify everything. Well, why? Well, as you all know, and you hear this preached at you all the time, renewables are getting cheaper. And renewables are competitive with fossil fuels, is what they preach to you. Little footnote here, a little warning. Every time you see anything out of the clean energy arena, and again, I'm a Californian, I live in this clean energy genre day in and day out. They talk about clean energy in the context of levelized cost of energy, levelized cost of hydrogen, levelized cost of solar and wind and so forth. And I think the metrics they're using are very good metrics, but they're OPEX metrics, when the wind is on or when the solar is on. That is indeed what the cost per unit of power generation is. The problem is the fully burdened cost for 24/7 operation is much different than just an OPEX cost. And so they understate the true cost. And so when you go look at the cost, true cost, that locations like California, Australia, and others where they have higher rates of variable renewable penetrations, inevitably you see the prices of energy climbing, like we're seeing in Germany, California, Australia. And so I think there's a risk in this message as well. This isn't just all greenness on the other side of the horizon. There's a chance, in fact, the biggest risk I have to present to investors is you got to watch out. What if this whole thing blows up? What if the cost structures and the benefits just aren't there? What if you're not moving the CO2 needle after all these efforts? Is there a point where attitudes start to shift? Certainly we need to be moving the CO2 needle, and I really question whether or not we're going to get there or not. Regardless, IRENA is up there. I've got this chart I've kind of kludged. Back in 2018, they showed a picture of the global energy grid with 86% of the global grid being non-renewables and 14% being renewables. And they do roadmaps every couple of years. And so back in 2018, under the yellow there, their latest roadmap showed, hey, we got to grow this renewable penetration up to 23% by 2050. That was in 2018 roadmap. 2020 roadmap comes out. They've increased it to a whopping 74% variable renewables. And now in this year's iteration, they've changed it all the way up to 90%. They want 90% of all new energy installations to be renewables. Wow, that's astonishing. Especially when you start digging into some of the details and you realize, hey, variable renewables, they're funny because they're, well, variable. And you need a baseline capability in your energy grid to be able to meet your evening peak demands. That's a risk that hasn't been conquered yet. The hydrogen economy and being able to do large-scale energy storage is going to be the mechanism, they think, that is most likely going to be able to serve this massive energy storage dilemma that we have in front of us, that we have yet to conquer. So we're executing a plan relying on an energy storage solution that doesn't exist. Ooh, okay. A little bit of a risk. The other issue going on, and you guys all see this, I'm a Silicon Valley guy, is we're electrifying everything. Oh my goodness. What aren't we electrifying? Everything, of course, from the renewables, the EVs. 5G has generated all sorts of interesting metals demand. Smart buildings and homes, you'll be fascinated to see what they're planning in that vein. Heavy industries, and of course, all things, the Internet of Things and the connectivity. We're going to approach some 4 billion connected devices by 2024. And I think when you look at the renewable energy trends and you look at the electrification of everything, there's one big disconnect that happened along the way. Nobody talked to mining. Nobody had their resource requirements underpinned. And this is still the fundamental problem that we have today. And so we're seeing this shift now in mining investment. What have we seen? Well, we've seen Tesla start the way, leading with the preaching about responsible mining. And thank you, Elon, for being responsibly minded relative to nickels and cobalts and some of the worst ESG sins we have on the planet that are operating today. At least Elon's got the balls to say, hey, we want to do this correctly. We're going to invest ourselves, and he's doing his own vertical integration, both in intermediates as well as into mining. And then we've seen VW, we've seen Ford, GM, and others make similar announcements that they too are going to have to start investing in the mining and the intermediates world. Well, I was playing some games with how much mining investment is needed, and you could take the market cap of all the big auto, including Tesla and all of its wonderful market cap, and somehow if you're able to liquidate that and do all that investment, still isn't enough by a long shot. So even with what they're doing, it will not be enough. There's still going to be a gap. But clearly there's this big disconnect with mining. And by the way, big disconnect with environmentals. Talk to an environmentalist, I'm for all this stuff. Oh, you're into mining. I'm so thrilled to be somebody who's into mining. No, I didn't say that. Well, hold it. You can't be in favor of all these technologies without being in favor of the mining resources that are required. And there's this huge disconnect and this huge NIMBY, not in my backyard attitude toward this. Out of sight, out of mind. We're going to push it away. That creates a complexity for you guys as investors as well. Why? China is always going to do things on the cheap. If it's nickel mining tailings from a HPAL process in Indonesia, and the easiest path is to dump your 5-micron fluffy mine tailings into the ocean, so be it. That's what they're going to do. Or if, their tailings management plan is weak and you've got all sorts of runoff into, fouling the Indonesian waters, they don't seem to have the same ESG intensity as the rest of the world. And that creates a cost advantage for them. REEs, go look at rare earths and how they process rare earths, and I'll talk about that briefly. My God, it's just astonishing how much waste we're generating and haphazardly. Our automobiles that we're driving, I talk about this all the time, they're computers on wheels. They're not automobiles. It's electronics on wheels these days, right? And even an ICE vehicle has 35 to 40% of the cost of the vehicle is electronics. Well, suddenly you jump to a BEV, and that statistic is as high as 70% of the vehicle cost is electronics and electrification. And the systems just keep growing, and the content just keeps adding. The power grid. Nobody likes to talk about this. I do this nice depiction here of the power grid. So I show the actual historical. This is the global electricity generation. And so there in 2020-ish, we're sitting at 27,000 terawatt hours of electricity generation globally. So what does IRENA see as an outlook for what we got to do going forward? In their view, we need to triple the global power grid. More and more, I'm concluding we need to quadruple it. We need to add some for desalinization as well. But you can look at the chart here and you can see, well, in the green there, one thing they want to set aside is a huge budget for electrolyzers, for these green hydrogen electrolyzers. Okay. Very energy intensive processes, so we got to set aside a budget for that. Also, we need to charge all these EVs. You're going to have 1.52 billion EVs on the road by 2050. You need to grow the power grid by 50% higher than it is today just to satisfy those charging requirements. Those are facts. And so they account for that as well. So growing the grid, by the way, when I look at charts like this, I just see metals. My mind converts to metals right away. Think about all the content on copper and aluminum and power transmission. IEA has been standing up and screaming for years. Do you guys realize that this energy transition is minerals intensive? And they give some nice little cheat sheets to show you the contrast. The top one there is an EV versus an ICE vehicle. Look at how much more copper is needed. On average, you need about 3 times more copper in an EV, as well as all the battery metals. What about power generation? What are the critical metals there? Well, you can see offshore and onshore wind, solar PV, nuclear, again, all very big copper-intensive operations. And you can see other critical minerals that they've identified. I'm barking at this list with the IEA. I think it's missing a few key things. One is it's clearly missing silver. Silver needs to be on that list. Silver is a huge part of electronics, right? 50% of silver goes into electronics. 13% of silver alone goes into solar PV and growing year over year. So I think silver needs to be on the list. PGMs for the hydrogen economy. And by the way, the PGMs I'm talking about, when I'm talking about autocatalyst, it's platinum, palladium, and rhodium for the catalytic converter. But when you're talking hydrogen economy of the future, it's going to be platinum, iridium, and ruthenium. Nobody's heard of ruthenium. I'm the world's premier expert on ruthenium. See me later if you want to know about ruthenium. It's key to a lot of these little operations. Mining and the ESG challenges continue to grow, as you guys know more than anybody. Of course, I'm preaching to the choir here. Every year there's more and more ESG requirements. Our timelines are growing. This is part of that disconnect. The timelines taking now from funding until operations and getting a mine off the ground are literally doubling from where we were a decade or two ago. And it's going to get worse. And so there's a real conflict here on what we need to do, how much mining do we need. And of course, a number of people, starting with the IE, jumped up and they talked about the multiples of mining that we need for lithium, graphite, cobalt, nickel. They were showing charts showing the big, huge supply-demand disconnects. Then suddenly Wood Mackenzie, BNEF, UBS, and other analysts are standing up and saying, hey, we've got some big gaps coming our way. And they are. They're massive gaps. And I'll show you some pictures of what I think those gaps look like. And so in my consulting business, I've gotten down to where I do a kind of a 2-case scenario, a base case and a high case. And I do it for a litany of different things simultaneously. And I'm doing supply-demand impacts on literally about half the periodical table simultaneously now. So it's become a chore, and I keep revving this. But my base case, I'll show you my base case powertrain mix. What is the EV mix going to look like in the future? What are they calling for? Will they have a zero-emission mandates? The EU just banned ICE vehicles in 2035. It'll be interesting to see if we can actually get there. My call is no, we can't. No way in hell are we going to get there. Energy storage. Not only do they want the batteries, of course, for the cars, but they want to have larger and larger amounts for decentralized networks and solar grids and different industrial uses. Solar PV, they want to grow like crazy. They want to grow to some 14 terawatts of installed solar capacity. That's 14 times larger than we've got today. Still to go. They want to see wind grown tremendously, so we're well under a terawatt now. They want to see us get to 8 terawatts. Fuel cell vehicles. As soon as there's a backlash that we don't have enough battery minerals, I project there'll be a big swing and more attention paid toward hydrogen vehicles as an alternative. And I'm a PGM guy at heart. That sounds thrilling to me, but the problem is I've been screaming at all the PGM miners, we need to double our mining. And that message hasn't resonated with those guys yet. And their timelines, forget an open pit. Now, when you're talking PGM mining, you're talking about a real process, a timeline to get those mines staged. And so I'm barking at the likes of Anglo, and Sibanye has a plan that will do some brownfield projects that will grow their capacity. But for the most part, we clearly are not going to have enough PGMs. By the way, that's a hang-up for me. We're going to get into all these variable renewables. You're going to need these PGMs more than ever as this grid balancing mechanism to help you in this energy storage game. And there's not going to be enough PGMs either. We're going to get pinched in every single direction on every one of these clean technologies. So I'm going to show you a base case in green and a high case with all these different things simultaneously at once. My zero-emission ban, I need to update this based on last week. Again, Europe just announced their new ICE ban in 2035. There's different European countries that we're talking about doing some transitionings in 2030, so I need to go clean this up a bit. But the point is that there's these staggered dates that people are laying out when they're going to transition to zero-emission vehicles. And the problem with those zero-emission vehicle bans is they want to ban hybrids and plug-in hybrids along the way. Well, they have a nice engine in it. They've got to go. I show a powertrain mix here on the left and the zero-emission case on the right. Let me go through the one on the left to begin with, my base case. Green, those are your full-range, 300-mile EVs, your Teslas, if you will. Thing about a Tesla is it takes a battery that's pretty sizable. It's about a 1,200-pound battery. It's pretty sizable. We're not talking grams, right? It's huge. In the yellow are hybrids and plug-in hybrids. Let's talk about a Toyota Prius. A Toyota Prius has a battery in it. When they first launched the Prius, it was a 4-kilowatt battery. They've grown it now to 8.8. But compared to a 90-kilowatt-hour Tesla, that's 1/10 of the size. You can make 10 Toyota Priuses for every one Tesla. Kind of a big deal. By the way, when you look at all the European numbers on car sales, they've only got 10% penetration on full-range BEVs. They've got some 30% penetration on those hybrids and plug-in hybrids. It's the hybrids and the plug-in hybrids that are giving them the leverage that's lowering their emissions and helping them meet the Paris Climate Accords, at least early. And yet that's what they want to ban. My big hang-up, just from a purely materials supply chain perspective, is every time you call out a green, that's 10 times more weight in batteries than what's in the yellow. That's huge. That's a huge demand multiplier. And then when you scale that across, entire global fleet sales, that's enormous. And so my base case is a very conservative case to what you're going to see to most any analyst. I mean, you'll see analysts talking about, we're going to do 60 million, full-range BEVs by 2030. There's no way in hell. The metal is not there. It cannot be done. On the right-hand side, this, I'm going to back up, ties into my chart with the staggers on these zero-emission dates. And I left it staggered and kind of jagged on purpose so you could see the steps in demand. There's a red line through these charts on both sides. That's the terawatt hours of battery demand. That's translating the yellow and green into battery demand in terawatts. And so I show a state where if we can get to 6 terawatts of battery demand for EVs by 2050, we're doing pretty good. You'll need another 2 terawatts for heavy-duty vehicles. You'll need another couple terawatts for storage capability on top of that, right? So collectively, that's a lot of battery demand. And people push back. Oh, we're going to transition so much faster that I think you're going to see these constraints really bear themselves out in the second half of this decade. By 2030, you're going to hear loud and clear about all these constraints because it's holding back the numbers. And of course, when you're talking lithium-ion batteries, you think there's one chemistry flavor out there? No, get over it. These are all lithium-ion batteries on this slide here. You've got these NMC varieties and NCAs. These are nickel-rich, and the blue is nickel. I show some prices there. On the top, I show a price back in October 21, and then just a few months later, in February of 22. And look how much the prices have gone up on cobalt. Lithium shot from 18,000 to 75,000 a ton. Suddenly these became very expensive propositions. And the desire from the engineering perspective is they want more and more nickel. They want to do that for energy density. That gives you the best density battery that we can get with the best performance. Well, it ends up that nickel and that cobalt are a supply problem. And there's been a dramatic shift within the battery world that analysts were not projecting as little as just 5 years ago. And they're moving very rapidly to a design called LFP. You can see the LFP, it's third in from the left. LFP, yeah, it's got lithium in there, but it's got a lot of cheap phosphates and iron in there. It's a much cheaper configuration to make. By the way, one of those nice things about that cheap configuration to make is that it's economically underwater for recycle, by the way. So all my recycle friends in the auto catalyst world, they've got to pay to get rid of these LFP batteries. And by the way, they're dying early, too. They're dying at as early as 5 years of age. I've got guys with just serious tons of weight of LFP batteries that they can't unload. They've got to pay not to go to landfill, effectively. So there's going to be more of this metal moving to landfills than people realize as well. unless it's economical to recycle. So they're trying to migrate to these more nickel-rich compositions, but they realize that is going to be both a cost and a supply constraint. And so this really rapid transition that's transpired that nobody really saw coming was moving to this LFP chemistry. We're sitting just under 50% of the global supply of these batteries are at this LFP configuration, with China leading the way. Most of the China capacity is already converted to this LFP. Well, most of the Europe and the rest of the world are playing with these nickel configurations still. How much demand is needed? And so I'm going to show you a series of charts. On the left is my base case with that green at the bottom, and on the right is that zero emission case. Here's the lithium. This is not lithium carbonate. This is not LCA. This is pure lithium as mine. And you can see the requirements here. And you can see what's going on with the price. It's jacked up. It's now sitting today. It went through $80,000 a ton over the weekend. So we're sitting, I think, at close to $81,000 a ton today. And you look forward at the demand requirements. Oh, my gosh. Where are we going to get all this stuff? Elon knows the answer to this. I'm a big Elon fan. For those of you in the battery world, lithium direct extraction from the brines is absolutely the key to this segment and breaking the batteries open and making this base case go faster. Elon knows this. Here I show the same sort of data. Here I show lithium, cobalt in the top right, and nickel on the bottom, just showing you all three of the primary battery nickels together. And they're all going to be challenged. There's no way we're going to be able to get there on all of them in the time required. We're going to miss. And again, the best hope is this lithium direct extraction. Well, Matt, why is lithium direct extraction so important? You go look at the reserves, the global reserves. Where is the lithium in the Earth's crust? The salt flats are the biggest deposits by far. All the salt flats. Most of these salt flats are not mapped out. There's been no mining development, project stage where you can, lay out the potential OpEx on a salt flat mine. Here's what I'd end up with. So it doesn't get listed in the USGS as a known reserve, but we know it's there. We just don't simply have a good enough technology to extract it from the brines. Today there is a process to extract it from the brines. It involves about 500,000 gallons of fresh water for every 1 ton processed. And the funny thing about salt flats is there's not a lot of water around salt flats. That's pretty much constant around the globe, especially in the lithium triangle up at Argentina and Bolivia at 12,000 foot elevation in these high plains and deserts. There's no water out there. There's water wars already going on early with just a little bit of lithium mining going on there, where the world's biggest deposits of lithium are known to be at. You got to come up with a process that doesn't take 500,000 gallons of fresh water. You got to come up with some new form of a direct lithium extraction technology. There's, I think, 3, and now I found a 4th one the other day. I didn't list it, but there's, I think, 4 different projects that are going on trialing this lithium direct extraction. One of them is one of my clients, this IBC Technologies. They're doing some trials with Tesla as well, and they report they're meeting most of their metrics. So I think there's a path that will get there. There's some larger scale demonstrations that are going to start here shortly. But this is really one topic to watch. How much can we bust open this EV penetration? This topic is key to that discussion. Electrification metals, moving on to copper and silver. It's funny, when you talk to analysts, by the way, in that powertrain mix, what's that powertrain mix going to look like? Analysts' views on Wall Street, plus or minus a hand grenade. I mean, you could find analysts that will sell you anything. And a lot of people are selling these unconstrained models where they don't know what the mining limitations are that will gate this ramp. Well, that's a huge, important discussion, obviously, if you're going to do any reasonable planning. But when you get to copper, it's funny, copper, the analyst views are very narrow. We're all pretty much right on top of each other. We've got to get around to 50 million tons a year by 2050. Is where everybody largely ends up, yeah. Forget how much copper we've mined in the past 1,500 years as mankind. We need to double it in the next 30. That's the message. Oh, shit. A lot of that's sitting in Chile. You think Chile's going to exploit itself that much to get to that copper? By the way, Chile, 30% of its power grid is for mining already today. Wow, think about what Chile will look like in 3 decades if people go after the lithium and all the other copper and all the other metals there. It could be a very much transformed nation. So anyway, the electrification, and I've got some annotation I can't do without my PowerPoint, but circled in the red, these are all the new clean energy technologies that basically are an accelerator to this copper demand. All the solar, all the wind, it creates a steeper demand slope is what it does. Silver, I'm very big on silver. Why silver sitting around 19, 20 bucks? I cannot explain. It should be 30 easily. It just is so mispriced. And again, I'm the Silicon Valley guy. I walk through, I could tell you the loadings on silver in different products that like nobody else, but there's just not going to be enough silver. If you go look at the history of USGS reserves on silver, we've kind of hit our peak. We're on our way down. The ore grades are declining dramatically. There's just not going to be enough silver to do all the industrial things we want to do with it. I do white papers every year with the Silver Institute. My buddy Mike Dorenzo there, I keep trying to sell him, hey, by about the mid-2040s, silver's going to be an industrial metal. Well, today about a third of the weight goes to jewelry and to investment. I think by about mid-2040s, it's going to be completely devoted to industrial applications. And not that there's not going to be investment dollars. There's always going to be investment dollars. But the point being is, unless you dramatically expand this mining, and recovery, by the way, recycle as well. There's a lot of low-grade silver that goes to landfills because we know it's there, but it's just too expensive to extract, to refine out. So in any event, there's a huge opportunity here. By the way, recycling solar panels might be nice. Let's go dump those on the landfills right next to those big wind turbines. But we're saving the planet. You guys keep that in mind. Silver. I'm completely bullish on silver long-term. I don't show it in there, but aluminum as well. Aluminum, you don't think of aluminum as electrification metal. It will become an electrification metal by default. All these power transmission needs are already running into troubles with copper supply and are forcing themselves to swap out submarine cables with carbon steel and aluminum, which is a fascinating risk. Why they would do that is quite interesting. Of course, all of our overhead power transmission lines are aluminum. It's a much lighter weight. You could put the stanchions on the supports further apart, lower infrastructure costs. But the demands on aluminum are going to increase from a power transmission perspective dramatically. And so you hear a lot of that in the automotive ranks. There's the more and more aluminum products they need just to support vehicle builds. Rare earth metals. My clients, I'm from the hard drive space. One of my clients freaking out. What's going on with neodymium? You know, it's jumped up 7x. Well, hang on. You may not have seen anything yet. Rare earths, wind power. Oh, there's magnets, huge magnets, a couple hundred kilograms of neodymium, iron, and boron. That's the magic alloy that creates the strongest magnet in the world. And so they use it in windmills. They use it basically in every motor. In EVs, they rely on neodymium. And of course, the Chinese dominate the mining of the rare earths. But you look at the EV demands, the wind demands, solar demands, everything. It's going to put us in a position where rare earths need to double to triple between now and 2050. Hydrogen economy, and I know there's lots of information on this slide. Platinum on the top left, iridium on the top right, ruthenium at the bottom. None of these is going to get to where we need to go. Those red tones in the top of those stacked bar charts are basically hydrogen economy related demands, and you can see how the demands just take off. I'm very well immersed with clients in this space. They see it coming. We're working on design thrifting on a whole bunch of different levels. By the way, if you're in the space, Furuya Metals, F-U-R-U-Y-A, Furuya Metals, a Japanese firm, has to be part of your portfolio. Furuya is a little Japanese group is quietly controlling about 60 to 70% of the ruthenium and iridium market. And more folks are waking up to that little tidbit, and they're going to continue to control it. See me later if you want more on that. And you can't read this chart, but so I do these roll-ups. I do all these metals, and then what I'll do is I'll take from 2021 through 2050, what's the summation of demand for copper on my base case, on my high case? What's the summation of my demand for nickel, cobalt, lithium, all down the line? And I've basically tabulated here. How much recycling are we going to have that's going to offset those mining requirements? Give me a net mining demand. And let's put that net mining demand in the context of USGS reserves. That's what I'm going to do on this chart. On the left, base case. On the right, my high case. On the bottom, 100%. This is 100% of the known USGS reserves as of today. So what's this chart saying? On the left-hand side, nickel, cobalt, lithium. You have to extract close to 100% of your, or beyond, of your known reserves just to meet that base case. Whoa. Well, how quickly can we do exploration and add new sites to this known reserve? Becomes the challenge. Beyond known resources, or known reserves rather, as you know, is inferred global resources. These, they have projects mapped out, but the OpEx is not favorable. Either the ore grade is too low, or there's complexities in processing or extraction that don't make it feasible. But perhaps with higher prices, they would become feasible in the future. And then beyond that, of course, is exploration and discovery. And real quick, you look at the battery metals and you go, oh crap, we're in a bad way. Again, to crack this nut on the EV battery penetrations, you got to go do lithium direct extraction. That could change that dynamic. Could you do more LFP type designs avoiding nickel and cobalt completely? More and more, that's where the design engineers are taking that discussion. What about the electrification metals, copper and silver? My answer is we're screwed there no matter what you do. Absolutely screwed there. It's a great place to be. I tell all my recycling friends, if you're not recycling copper, start doing it. Absolutely. How about hydrogen economy? Well, look, there's actually 150 years worth of known reserves. We know where they're at. Oh, they're complex, hard to get to. In South Africa, a lot of these PGM deposits are a half mile to a mile deep. That's a bummer. Some of the most complex mining on the planet. But we know where it's at. We're not relying on, exploration. And then finally, rare earths. The biggest naming convention faux pas in all of history. It's not rare. 400 plus years worth of known reserves. We know exactly where they're at. There's all sorts of deposits in North America. Rare earths aren't rare. They're just dirty as hell. You generate 2,000 tons of toxic material for every 1 ton processed. By the way, if you're China and you want to do this on the cheap, it's real simple. You take that big REE processing facility that's next to a population hub of 2.3 million. For China, 2.3 million is out back. That's nothing. But next to that 2.3 million people, you have an unlined lake where you are just dumping your toxic materials like a fire hose in there for years. That lake is now 6 miles in diameter. It's dead as dead can be. It's the most toxic site on the planet. You think they could do REEs on the cheap? Yeah, I think they can. And yet REEs are so fundamentally important to all these conversations and all sorts of different technologies. We need them. And so devising a strategy outside of China that is ESG sensible is so important and so needed. And again, there's plenty of deposits. We just need to go after it and just do the right thing. And so I try to summarize. So this clean energy transition, it's mineral intensive. It's driving us right off a cliff on all sorts of metals. Mining investment's not going to meet the mark. We're clearly missing, even with big autos involvement. Again, you can take all their market caps and throw it into mining investment, and you won't get there. By the way, out of all the trillions of dollars that we spend on Green New Deal, why don't we spend $1 trillion on mining? Little thought. And I'll give you some breakdown of some of these constraints. I'm also getting into nuclear materials, not only the uranium, which I'm very pro-uranium. Don't forget about your hafnium and your zirconium along the way that goes along with that. And there's a little bit of silver that goes in nuclear reactors as well. There's discussions I get into with heat exchangers, other metals, scandium. I'm hot on scandium. One of the most fascinating elements on the periodical table that has a dozen new uses, but they don't even bother developing those markets because there's just not enough scandium. If you had enough scandium, you'd start doing 2% alloys with aluminum, and you'd have aluminum with the strength of steel and lightweighting efforts that could help EVs and a number of other industries beyond what we're doing already. Scandium's also very big for bloom energy and solid oxide fuel cells, if you're interested. And I could go, I'll leave this as my final slide. I do topics on these constraints in different areas. If you have any interest in these materials, don't hesitate to contact me. I'll be lounging poolside here all day. I'm out in the morning, but I'll be available today. I'm hard to miss. Okay, with that, are there any questions? I bored you to death. You guys all right? Oh, we got a runner? Come on, do your best Phil Donahue here.
Just time for one question here. You mentioned aluminum and copper.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the efficiency of electricity flowing through each?
So go look up just basic conductivity. There's a chart I show that just shows the conductivity relative to copper as kind of a baseline. Silver is actually the most conductive metal on the periodical table. That's why they use it in solar panels, by the way, and will continue to. Right behind that is copper, and then there's a huge drop-off beyond that. Aluminum drops down at 61% of the conductivity of copper. And so you get forced into discussions where you've got to do direct versus alternating current over certain distances, but they're going to accept higher transmission losses with aluminum, is the bottom line, just because there's not enough copper. One of the things to watch is in Europe in particular, they want to do a lot of these big renewable hubs on the North African continent, whether it be Morocco or Libya somewhere, and then do submarine cables for power transmission to Europe to feed them their renewables. Generate the renewables in more irradiation, hot regions like North Africa, and better wind regions for the solar or for the wind obviously. But the submarine cables are really a big problem. They're going to be so costly, and there's just not enough copper. They would clearly prefer to use copper, but there's just there was one project going from Morocco to England. They would need 140,000 metric tons of copper. Instead, they use 360,000 metric tons of carbon steel, and they're going to accept higher transmission losses as an alternative. I'm not sure that's the right trade-off, but some of these trade-offs, they're not going to have a choice. Okay. Again, I will be around, so don't hesitate if you have any questions to look me up, and I'll be glad to answer any of your questions. Thank you for your time, guys.